For centuries, there's probably no topic that's ignited more passionate, more personal, and more profound debate than the ethics of sex. It's a conversation that's just jam-packed with deeply held beliefs, conflicting philosophies, stuff that touches the very core of who we are. So where do all these powerful arguments even come from? Right. So, what is it about this one area of human life that makes it such an intense moral and political battleground? That's really the central question we're going to try to unpack here. And it all starts with two fundamentally different ideas about what sex even is. So, on one side, you've got the traditional view: sex is a sacred act. It was given by a divine power for a very specific purpose, and that purpose is mainly procreation within marriage. But on the other side, you have the liberal view that it's a natural, biological impulse, a source of pleasure and human connection that we should embrace, not be ashamed of. And those two starting points, they're in direct conflict. And let me tell you, this is not a new fight. We're talking thousands of years. The greatest minds in theology and philosophy have been at war over this very question. So let's trace the story of that intellectual battle, from its ancient roots all the way to the arguments that are still raging today. Okay, so to really get a grip on this debate, we have to start with what I'm calling the traditional blueprint, the foundational ideas of religious sexual ethics that pretty much shaped Western thought for centuries. And a key architect here, a huge figure, was St. Augustine. His concept of original sin was just profoundly influential. He argued that after the fall from grace in the Garden of Eden, all of humanity became what he called a massa damnata, basically a mass of the damned. And for him, sexual lust was a direct and shameful consequence of this fall. He's the one who really fundamentally linked the idea of sex with shame in Western culture. And that idea got developed into something we now call natural law. The core concept here is telos, which is a Greek word that means purpose. The theory goes like this: God designed everything in the universe with a specific purpose, and the primary telos of sex? Well, that's procreation, and it's meant to happen within a marriage. So logically, any sexual act that intentionally gets in the way of that purpose is considered unnatural and, by extension, morally wrong. But of course, that blueprint was not going to go unchallenged. And this leads us to what we could call the liberal Reformation, a period where all these new ideas started bubbling up and really questioning these ancient rules. And a huge part of this shift came from how people started to read the Bible itself. The conservative view, which was the long-standing view, is that the Bible is the perfect, literal word of God, so its rules are timeless, they're absolute. But then a more liberal view emerged, arguing that, wait a minute, the Bible is a human product. It reflects the culture and the biases of the time it was written, and that means it requires constant reinterpretation to have any meaning for us today. And that idea, well, that just blew the doors wide open for a complete reevaluation of sexual ethics. Now, this shift wasn't just happening in theology. Over in the secular world, you had thinkers like Sigmund Freud who were arguing that, hey, repressing our natural sexual desires isn't virtuous. It's actually unhealthy. It can lead to mental illness. Then biology comes along and reframes lust not as some symptom of original sin, but as a normal product of evolution. So out of all this, a whole new ethic started to emerge. Sexual freedom is a good thing as long as it doesn't harm anyone. Now, one of the most important secular thinkers you have to know about is Immanuel Kant. He came up with what he called the categorical imperative, which was his core rule for all morality. It's this: you must never treat another person as a mere means to your own ends, but always as an end in themselves. Basically, don't just use people. Recognize they have their own goals, their own dignity. It's a really powerful, rational principle, right? But how does this high-minded, logical rule apply to something as messy and passionate and, well, human as sex? The answer might actually surprise you. See, despite his totally secular, reason-based approach, Kant came to a surprisingly traditional conclusion. He argued that any sex outside of marriage has to involve using the other person as an object for your own gratification, a mere means to an end. For him, the only way to solve this moral problem was a lifelong marital contract, where two people basically give each other equal rights over their entire personhood. And this quote, wow, it really shows how Kant's own cultural feelings might have shaped his pure reason. He had some shockingly harsh views, suggesting a child born outside marriage had no legal protection and could just be left to die. For his critics, this is Exhibit A, that even our most rational arguments can sometimes just be fancy justifications for the biases we already have. So all of this philosophy, it boils down to one central political question. Is your sex life purely your own private business, or is it society's business too? This is the public versus private war. On the side of the private sphere, you've got John Stuart Mill. His famous harm principle is basically the foundation of modern liberalism. He argued that the only time anyone has the right to interfere with your freedom is to prevent you from harming others. What you do consensually in private, that's your business, period. But not everyone was buying that. There was a powerful counterargument from Lord Devlin, a British judge. He argued that a society isn't just a random bunch of individuals. No, it's a community that's held together by a shared morality. And because of that, it has every right to use the law to protect its moral fabric from unraveling. See, for Devlin, what really holds a society together isn't physical. It's not roads and buildings, it's moral. It's held together by what he called the invisible bonds of common thought. And he was worried that if you let those shared moral bonds loosen, even in private, you could be starting the first stage of disintegration. So there it is, this fundamental clash. Is the main job of the law to protect individual liberty, like Mill said, or is it to protect the very existence of society itself by upholding a shared morality, like Devlin believed? This question is still right at the heart of our most heated legal debates today. And if you think for a second that this is all just dusty old history, think again. These exact same arguments, using almost the same logic, are raging more fiercely than ever today. Let's take a look at how these ancient debates are playing out with modern voices. So, remember natural law? Well, here it is, alive and well. In 2005, the man who would become Pope Benedict XVI described the homosexual inclination as an objective disorder. The language is modern, but the idea that some desires go against a natural, God-given purpose, that's a direct echo of thinkers from centuries ago. And here is the modern liberal response, which is all about Mill's harm principle. The broadcaster Stephen Fry argues that using language like disorder isn't just some abstract theological point, it causes real-world harm. He says it contributes to bullying, to stigmatization, and tragically to suicide among young people.
Now, the classic defense you'll hear against this charge is a very specific theological distinction. Hate the sin, love the sinner. The argument here is that the condemnation is only for the act, or maybe even the inclination, but not for the person themselves. It's an attempt to draw a line between someone's behavior and their very being.
But for critics like the late Christopher Hitchens, he was having none of it. He called that distinction revolting casuistry, a kind of deceptive, clever-sounding nonsense. He argued that when you condemn someone's innate orientation, you're not just condemning an act, you're condemning the very essence of who they are. And that brings us right back to Lord Devlin's invisible bonds. This whole centuries-long debate really comes down to this one question. As our understanding of science and psychology and human rights changes, we have to decide which of the old moral bonds that held our society together are essential and which are just unjust chains that need to be broken. The conversation isn't over, and now it's yours to continue.